France, 1772. The Château at Montrevel had always been too large for a single heart to fill. Its marble corridors echoed with the footfalls of generations. Its mirrors held the ghosts of laughter long vanished. Yet on that spring evening, as the air shimmered with the scent of lilacs and candle wax, the Château felt smaller than ever, its walls closing around the heart of Comtesse Élodie de Marçay, who had begun to understand the peril of her own longing. She had been married at 16 to the Marquis de Marçay, a man of impeccable title and glacial temperament, whose passions were reserved for his vineyards and his hunting hounds. At 23, Élodie had learned to wear serenity like silk, light, fragile, and suffocating. Her beauty, praised at Versailles, painted twice by Groys, had become another of her husband's possessions, admired but never touched. That evening, the Marquis entertained guests from Paris, financiers, courtiers, a few literary men whose powdered wigs and epigrams amused the company. Élodie sat beside her husband at the long table, nodding at conversation she did not follow. Beyond the tall windows, the gardens breathed in moonlight. She wished she could step out among the roses and vanish into the night. It was during the musicians' interlude that she first saw Julien Caron. He was not one of their guests, but a musician, one of the quartet hired from Lyon. He played the violin with a devotion that seemed almost prayerful, his head bent, dark hair falling into his eyes. He was perhaps 25, with the lean, restless look of someone who lived more in his thoughts than in his body. When his bow drew the final note, it hung in the air like the last sigh of something living. Their eyes met, just for a moment, and Élodie felt a small, traitorous flutter inside her chest. After supper, she escaped to the terrace under the pretense of fresh air. The moon cast the fountains in silver, and the night hummed faintly with crickets and the whisper of the Rhone beyond the hills. She thought herself alone until she heard the faint scrape of a bowstring. Julien stood in the shadow of the balustrade, testing a note softly so as not to disturb. "You play beautifully," Élodie said before she could stop herself. He turned sharply, bow lowering. "Madame la Comtesse, pardon, I did not know anyone remained." "You may continue," she said. "It is pleasant to hear something honest after a night of courtiers' conversation." He hesitated, then inclined his head. "As you wish, madam." The melody he played was unfamiliar, slow, mournful, threaded with longing. She listened, her hand resting on the cool stone, and felt as if the music spoke in a language she had always known but never dared to answer. When he finished, he looked up. Their eyes met again, longer this time. "Did you compose it?" she asked. "Yes, madam. It is for someone I have not yet met." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you have now." Julien blinked, uncertain if she teased him. But Élodie only turned back toward the ballroom, where laughter spilled through the doors. "Good night, Monsieur Caron." "Good night, madam." As she walked away, he thought he heard her whisper the melody under her breath. The days that followed brought rehearsals, performances, endless dinners. The musicians were to remain at Montrevel for a fortnight, and Élodie found reasons, innocent, plausible reasons, to cross their path. She brought them coffee in the salon under the guise of hospitality, lingered near the music room, praised their skill. Each time, Julien bowed, addressed her with perfect formality, and each time, his gaze lingered a fraction too long. It was on the fifth evening, as the rain tapped against the windows, that their fragile politeness began to tremble. Julien had been summoned to the library to tune the Marquis's harpsichord. Élodie, knowing her husband was occupied with estate accounts, entered quietly. "You play the violin," she said softly, "yet you are made to tune an instrument you do not love." He smiled, a little rueful. "It is my trade to serve those who do not understand music, madam. But one must live. You speak as if art were a kind of hunger. Is it not? We starve for beauty, for meaning. And when we find it," he met her eyes, "we are forbidden to touch it." The words hung between them, too sharp, too sincere. Élodie turned away, her pulse unsteady. "You are bold, monsieur. Forgive me. Do not apologize." Outside, the rain thickened into a storm. Thunder rolled across the Rhone valley, and the candles wavered in their sconces. In that trembling light, she saw the truth she had been avoiding. She had fallen in love with a man she could never claim. That night, Élodie dreamt of music and rain. The melody Julien had played, that quiet, aching strain, seemed to weave itself through her sleep, mingling with the scent of candle smoke and lilacs. When she woke, the dawn was pale and damp, and the air in her chamber still carried the faint echo of the violin. For the next several days, the weather cleared, but Élodie felt the storm had settled instead inside her. Her thoughts of Julien were like the persistent hum of a string beneath every note of her life. She tried to reason with herself. She was a comtesse, a wife, a woman whose every gesture was observed, whose smile or absence could stir the gossip of an entire province. Yet reason, once so obedient, had become a frail and trembling thing. She saw him again in the rose garden. It was late afternoon. The air shimmered with warmth and the buzz of bees among the blossoms. She had dismissed her ladies-in-waiting on a pretext, craving a solitary walk. But as she rounded the fountain, she saw him kneeling near the path, repairing the broken bridge of his violin. He rose at once, startled. "Madame la Comtesse, forgive me. I thought the gardens empty." "They are, except for us," she said softly. He hesitated, the instrument still in his hands. "Then perhaps I should go. Or perhaps," she murmured, "you should play." Julien's eyes flickered, fear, wonder, and something perilously like desire. But he obeyed. The bow touched the strings, and music poured forth, not the graceful minuets of the ballroom, but something raw, aching alive. The kind of melody that confesses everything words cannot. Élodie stood motionless as the notes unfurled around her like silk. Her throat tightened. When at last the music faded, the silence between them felt alive, fragile as spun glass. She took a step toward him. "Julien." Her voice broke on his name. He bowed his head. "Do not say it, madam. You are a star in a world I cannot reach. You speak as though stars do not fall." He looked up then, his gaze burning with the courage of a man who has already surrendered. "If you command me to forget you, I will try. But if you ask me to stay—" She reached for him before her mind could forbid it. Her gloved hand brushed his cheek, trembling. It was a single, stolen moment, the faint scent of rosin and roses, the warmth of skin she was not meant to touch. Then, suddenly, footsteps echoed down the gravel path. Élodie drew back, heart hammering. Her maid, Lucien, appeared around the hedge. "Madam, the Marquis returns early from Lyon." "Thank you," Élodie said quickly, her voice perfectly composed. Monsieur Caron was merely discussing music for the soirée. Lucien curtsied and departed. But the fragile thread between them had already begun to unravel. Julien set down his violin. "I will leave after tonight's performance, madam." Her breath caught. "Leave? But I cannot stay and live a lie. The Château is a cage, and every glance between us another bar." "You would abandon me to silence?" she whispered. He hesitated. Then, softly, "I would rather be miserable by choice than damned by your ruin." That night, at the soirée, Élodie sat among her guests like a statue carved of grace and restraint. Julien played one last time. The music was exquisite, but behind its perfection was a sorrow so sharp that several guests remarked on its strange beauty. When he finished, he bowed once, not to the room, but to her. And then he was gone. For 3 weeks, Élodie lived as though under glass. The rhythm of the Château resumed. Hunts, dinners, letters from Paris. But the world had lost its color. The only sound that could still pierce her was the echo of that violin. Until one morning, a sealed letter arrived, unsigned but written in the hand she now knew better than her own. "My lady, forgive me for this trespass of ink. I thought absence would free me, but I have discovered it is a different kind of captivity. I have found a post in Avignon at the chapel of Saint Pierre. There is music there, but none that sounds like you. If the wind ever carries my melody to Montrevel, know that every note is still yours. J.C." Élodie pressed the letter to her lips and wept for the first time in years. That night, unable to sleep, she went to the music room. The harpsichord sat silent beneath its velvet cover. She touched a single key, a pale, brittle sound, and thought of Julien's hands. A decision bloomed inside her then, wild and reckless. At dawn, disguised in her maid's cloak, she rode out from Montrevel on a borrowed mare, her heart pounding as fiercely as the hooves beneath her. The road to Avignon shimmered under the morning sun, and the scent of lavender filled the air. She had not ridden so far alone since girlhood, but the thought of turning back was unbearable. By afternoon, her gown was dust-streaked, her gloves torn. But when she saw the small stone chapel ahead, her breath caught. From within came faint strains of a violin. She dismounted, entered quietly, and there he was, Julien, standing in a shaft of golden light, playing before an empty altar. The music trembled with disbelief when he saw her. "Élodie," she smiled through tears. "You wrote that your music belonged to me. I've come to claim it." He crossed the chapel in 2 strides and caught her hands in his. For a moment, the world held its breath. No nobility, no scandal, no laws but the ones written in their hearts. Then he kissed her. The first kiss was hesitant, reverent, as though he feared she might vanish. The second was fierce, desperate, real. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "And I you," he said, "though it will destroy us both." For 3 stolen days, the world belonged only to them. Élodie and Julien lived in the tiny room above the chapel, a space fragrant with cedar and candle wax, its window looking out over the Rhone. They lived on bread, wine, laughter, and the soft astonishment of each other's nearness. In the quiet of dawn, she would trace the curve of his shoulder, whispering verses from La Nouvelle Heloise. In the evenings, he would play for her, notes trembling through the half-lit air like prayers too fragile for words. They spoke, sometimes, of what might come next. Could they flee? To Italy, perhaps, to Venice or Florence, where names and titles mattered less, where a woman might reinvent herself as a widow or a muse. But such dreams dissolved with the first echo of hooves in the courtyard below. Julien's bow slipped mid-phrase. He froze. "Did you hear?" Élodie's heart stopped. Through the narrow window, she saw 3 riders, her husband's livery unmistakable in the morning glare. The Marquis had come. Julien grasped her hand. "You must hide. Quickly." "No," she whispered. "It is too late." The chapel door burst open. The Marquis de Marçay entered, flanked by 2 soldiers. His powdered wig was immaculate, but his eyes blazed with fury. "So it is true," he said, voice like steel. "My wife, cavorting with a hired musician." Élodie stepped forward. "You may speak of me as you wish, monsieur, but do not insult him." Silence. The Marquis turned his glare to Julien. "You dare defile my house, my name?" Julien met his gaze steadily. "I loved her. That is my only crime." The Marquis's face twisted. "Then you shall be punished for it." Before Élodie could move, he struck Julien across the face with his riding glove. The soldiers seized him. "Stop!" she cried, struggling against the hands that tried to restrain her. "If you harm him, I will never forgive you." The Marquis's lip curled. "Forgive? You speak as if your forgiveness has value. You are my wife, madam. You will return to Montrevel at once." "I will not." The words hung in the air like lightning. "Then you are no longer my wife," he said coldly. "You are nothing." He turned to the soldiers. "Take him. The magistrate and alls will see justice done." "Justice?" Élodie cried. "For what?" "For love." But they were already dragging Julien away. His eyes found hers one last time, filled not with fear, but calm, as though he had already forgiven the world. "Élodie," he called, "remember me when the violets bloom." And then he was gone. The Marquis confined her to Montrevel. The servants whispered, the priest lectured, and time thickened around her like fog. No letters came, though she wrote 100, all unsent. Rumors trickled from alls, a trial, a sentence. They said Julien had been imprisoned for sedition, for dishonoring a noble house. Some said he had been beaten, others that he had sung through the night of his confinement, a melody so mournful the guards wept. One evening, Lucienne entered her chamber with red eyes. "Madam," she whispered, "he is gone." Élodie did not at first understand. "They found him in his cell this morning," Lucienne said. He took his own life." The world tilted. The walls of Montrevel blurred. The air vanished. For a long while, Élodie made no sound at all. Then she rose, walked to the window, and stared toward the horizon where the Rhone shimmered in the fading light. Weeks later, under the pretext of a pilgrimage, she rode alone to the chapel in Avignon. It was empty now, the air thick with dust and silence. On the altar lay his violin, cracked across the middle, a single violet pressed between the strings. She sank to her knees. "Julien," she whispered, "forgive me. I should have run sooner. I should have been braver." Her tears darkened the stone. The sound that escaped her was not a sob, but something quieter, as if her heart itself had learned to break without making noise. She took the violet, pressed it to her lips, and left the chapel. That spring, the gardens at Montrevel bloomed with an abundance of violets, more than anyone could remember. The Marquis remarked on the oddity, never suspecting their meaning. On the first evening of May, Élodie dressed in white silk and pearls, as she had the night she first saw Julien play. She dismissed her servants early and walked out to the rose garden, where the air was cool and the stars trembled faintly above the fountains. In her hand, she carried his letter, the one written from Avignon, and the violet, now brittle and pale. She knelt by the fountain's edge and let them fall into the water. The ink blurred, the flower drifted, and for a moment, the reflection in the water seemed to show him beside her again, his hand reaching out. She smiled. When they found her the next morning, she was lying peacefully among the violets, her face serene, the faintest trace of a smile still on her lips. The Marquis ordered a private burial, without music, without flowers. But the villagers, who had once heard Julien play in the square, came secretly at night and left fresh violets on her grave. They said that, sometimes, if you stood by the chapel in Avignon at twilight, you could still hear a violin, soft, distant, like the breath of a promise kept too late. Epilogue. Years later, when the Revolution swept through France, Montrevel burned. The tapestries, the silver, the portraits, all vanished into ash. But among the ruins, a peasant boy found a small wooden box, miraculously unscathed. Inside lay a single violet, perfectly preserved. And though no one could explain it, the faint scent of lilac and candle wax still lingered, as if time itself had paused to remember the hour when love, for one brief moment, had dared to defy the world.